The cafe receipt felt heavier in my hands than it should have. $127, $50 for lunch at Romano's, charged to my credit card while I was supposedly at my doctor's appointment 3 hours away. My wife Patricia had been getting sloppy with her lies, but this piece of paper was the final confirmation of what I'd suspected for months. She was having an affair. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The marble countertop of my kitchen island stretched before me like a chess board, and I was about to make the opening move in the most important game of my life. My name is Robert Matthews, though everyone calls me Bob. I'm 70 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered my wife's betrayal and orchestrated what I consider to be the perfect revenge. Not the kind that lands you in jail or ruins your reputation, but the kind that uses patience, intelligence, and the legal system to ensure that justice is served with surgical precision. What started as the worst day of my life became the catalyst for the most satisfying victory I'd ever achieved. The receipt trembled slightly in my weathered hands as I studied the timestamp. Tuesday, March 15th, 2:47 p.m. The same Tuesday when Patricia had kissed me goodbye at 1:30, claiming she needed to run errands while I went to my cardiologist in the next county. The same Tuesday when she'd returned home at 6 p.m. with grocery bags from Whole Foods, chattering about the long lines and terrible traffic that had delayed her. The same Tuesday when she'd avoided eye contact and gone straight to shower, claiming she felt dusty from all the shopping. Romano's was an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place couples went for intimate conversations over expensive wine. Not the kind of place my practical wife would visit alone for errands. The credit card alert had pinged my phone during my actual doctor's visit, but I dismissed it at the time, assuming Patricia had grabbed lunch somewhere during her busy afternoon. Dr. Henderson had been discussing my blood pressure medication, adjusting dosages and scheduling follow-up appointments, when my phone buzzed with the transaction notification. I'd silently cursed Patricia's timing, assuming she was making some expensive impulse purchase while I dealt with the mundane realities of aging. How wrong I'd been about everything. Now, with the physical receipt in my hands, the pieces formed a picture I could no longer ignore. I walked to my study, passing through rooms filled with 40 years of shared memories. Wedding photos smiled down from hallway walls, vacation snapshots clustered on side tables, grandchildren's artwork magneted to the refrigerator. Everything looked normal, peaceful, exactly as it had this morning before my world shifted on its axis. The house we'd built together, the life we'd created, all of it suddenly felt like an elaborate stage set designed to hide a performance I'd never been meant to see. My study occupied the front corner of our colonial home, with windows overlooking the garden Patricia had cultivated for 2 decades. Her prize-winning roses bloomed just outside the glass, their perfect red petals a mockery of the decay I was discovering inside our marriage. The mahogany desk that had belonged to my father dominated the room, surrounded by neat stacks of financial documents and business correspondence. At 70, I still maintained active involvement in the consulting firm I'd built from nothing, though my partner handled most of the day-to-day operations now. That partner was Michael Torres, a man 15 years younger whom I'd mentored, trusted, and considered one of my closest friends. I'd hired Michael 8 years ago when he was struggling to rebuild his career after a corporate restructuring had eliminated his previous position. He'd been grateful then, eager to learn, respectful of my experience and guidance. Over the years, he'd become more than an employee or business partner. He'd become family, someone Patricia and I had welcomed into our inner circle without reservation. The irony wasn't lost on me as I opened my laptop and logged into our credit card account, my fingers moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd built a fortune by paying attention to details. The transaction history loaded slowly, each entry a breadcrumb in the trail I was beginning to follow. March 15th, Romanos, $127, $50, but that wasn't all. February 28th, Romanos, $89, $35. February 14th, Romanos, $156.20. Valentine's Day. The date hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been in Chicago on business, sending flowers to Patricia from the hotel, she'd been celebrating Valentine's Day with someone else. The flowers I'd ordered had cost $85, delivered with a card expressing my love and apologies for being away on such an important day. Meanwhile, she'd been spending twice that amount on an intimate dinner with her lover, probably laughing about my romantic gesture while planning her next deception. The pattern extended backward through months of careful scrolling. Always Romanos, always during times when I was away or occupied elsewhere. The amounts varied, but the location remained constant. Someone had claimed this restaurant as their special place, somewhere they felt safe from discovery. January 20th, $94, $75, the day I'd been at my grandson's basketball tournament. December 18th, $167.30, when I'd been Christmas shopping for Patricia's surprise gift. November 15th, $78.90, during my quarterly tax preparation meetings. Each transaction represented a moment stolen from our marriage, a breach of trust that had been happening while I'd been focused on providing for our family, building our future, and maintaining the life Patricia claimed to value. The systematic nature of the deception was almost impressive in its audacity. She'd been conducting a full relationship under my nose, using my own money to finance romantic encounters while I remained oblivious to her betrayal. My chest tightened as I continued scrolling, each transaction a small betrayal, a moment stolen from our marriage. The timestamps told their own story. Late lunches when I was golfing with my retirement group. Early dinners when I was attending my men's Bible study. Morning coffee dates when Patricia claimed to be meeting her sister Susan for shopping. The lies had layers, backup stories for every deception, explanations for absences that I'd accepted without question, because I'd trusted the woman I'd married 40 years ago. I printed the transaction history, the pages emerging from my printer like evidence in a criminal trial. Which I supposed they were. The crime was adultery, and I was both detective and prosecutor, gathering proof for a trial Patricia didn't yet know was coming. The paper felt expensive in my hands, heavy stock that spoke of the wealth we'd accumulated together, wealth that Patricia was apparently willing to risk for whatever excitement she'd found with someone else. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 p.m., its familiar sound now carrying ominous weight. Patricia would be home soon from her book club, or yoga class, or whatever fictional activity she'd chosen to cover today's real agenda. I folded the restaurant receipts carefully and locked them in my desk drawer, next to the USB drive containing copies of all our financial records. The preparation was automatic. The methodical thinking that had built my consulting business now applied to the most personal investigation of my life. But first, I needed to confirm who Patricia was seeing. The credit card records proved an affair, but not the identity of her lover. That revelation came through careful observation over the following week, watching Patricia's patterns, noting her phone habits, and paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. She'd become careless in her happiness, comfortable in her deception, confident that her elderly husband was too trusting and too preoccupied with his own concerns to notice her betrayal. Thursday morning brought revelation disguised as routine. I was in my study reviewing client portfolios when I heard Patricia on the phone in the kitchen, her voice carrying that particular warmth she once reserved only for me. The tone made me pause, made me listen more carefully to words that weren't quite meant for my ears. She was standing by the window overlooking our backyard, one hand holding the coffee mug I'd given her for our anniversary, the other cradling her phone like a precious object. "I'm counting the hours until I see you," she was saying, her voice soft with affection I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "These pretenses are getting harder to maintain, but it won't be much longer now." A pause, presumably while the other person responded. Then Patricia's laugh, light and girlish in a way I hadn't heard in years. "You make me feel alive again, like the woman I used to be before everything became so predictable and routine." The words cut deeper than I'd expected. Predictable and routine. Was that how she saw our 4 decades together? The businesses we'd built, the children we'd raised, the comfortable life we'd created through years of partnership and mutual support. The trips we'd taken, the challenges we'd overcome, the quiet satisfaction of growing old together, all of it dismissed as predictable and routine by the woman who'd shared every moment of the journey. I moved quietly to the kitchen doorway, staying out of sight but close enough to hear her end of the conversation. She stood with her back to me, one hand holding the phone, the other absently playing with her wedding ring in a gesture I'd seen thousands of times over the years. The morning sunlight caught the diamond, sending small rainbows across the kitchen wall, a beautiful effect that now seemed like mockery. "Yes, I'll tell him I'm visiting Susan this weekend," she continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "We'll have 2 whole days together without any interruptions. I can hardly wait." The weekend trip to visit her sister in Portland, planned for months, carefully discussed over dinner just last week. Another lie, another deception, another piece of our marriage revealed as fiction designed to provide cover for her secret relationship. "I know it's been difficult for you too," Patricia continued, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Having to pretend everything is normal when we both know this is where we belong. But soon we won't have to pretend anymore. Soon we can be together openly, without all these games and deceptions." The conversation continued for several more minutes, Patricia making plans for their weekend together, discussing logistics and expressing emotions that should have been reserved for her husband. When she finally ended the call, she stood for a moment looking out at the garden we'd planted together, a small smile playing on her lips as she contemplated her upcoming romantic getaway. I backed away from the kitchen, returning to my study where I sat heavily in my leather chair and tried to process this newest information. 2 days together without interruptions. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full relationship, complete with romantic getaways and future planning. Patricia was already mentally divorced from our marriage, already planning her exit strategy while maintaining the pretense of caring about our life together. The betrayal had layers I was only beginning to understand. This wasn't a momentary weakness or a mistake she regretted. This was a calculated decision to build a new life with someone else while keeping me as financial security until the transition was complete. She was using our marriage as a safety net while she explored other options, treating our vows as a business arrangement rather than a sacred commitment. My phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting my dark thoughts. The contact name made my stomach lurch. Michael Torres. My business partner, my friend, the man I'd trusted with both my professional and personal life. The message was brief, but it changed everything. "Looking forward to the weekend. I love you." The phone slipped from my hands, clattering onto the hardwood floor of my study. Michael Torres. The man who'd been coming to our house for family barbecues, who'd played golf with me every Saturday morning for 3 years, who'd been best man at our youngest daughter's wedding. The man who knew intimate details about my health, my finances, my travel schedule. The man who'd sat at my dinner table just 2 weeks ago, discussing business strategies while secretly planning romantic weekends with my wife. I picked up my phone and stared at the message until the words blurred together. The betrayal by Patricia had been painful, but this felt like a surgical strike to everything I'd believed about trust, friendship, and human decency. Michael knew me well enough to understand exactly how much this would hurt. He'd been in my home, eaten at my table, celebrated holidays with my family, all while conducting a secret relationship with my wife. The calculation of it, the coldness required to maintain such a deception, revealed a character I'd never suspected. Michael had sat across from me in business meetings, discussing our company's future, our retirement plans, the legacy we were building together, all while he was systematically destroying my personal life and planning to steal my wife. The professional partnership I'd valued was built on the same foundation of lies as Patricia's marriage vows. But worse than the betrayal itself was the realization of how long it must have been going on. Michael had been part of our social circle for years, had watched me trust Patricia completely, had seen me make financial decisions based on the assumption that we'd grow old together. He'd had countless opportunities to warn me, to show some loyalty to the man who'd given him his career, to demonstrate basic human decency. Instead, he'd chosen to exploit my trust for his own selfish desires. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Alina Torres, Michael's wife of 20 years. We'd socialized regularly as couples, shared neighborhood barbecues and holiday parties. Alina was a warm, genuine woman who worked as a pediatric nurse and volunteered at their children's school. She'd always struck me as the kind of person who believed in the goodness of others, who trusted completely because she deserved to be trusted in return. Alina had 2 teenage children, Sophia, who was 17 and planning for college, and Marcus, who was 15 and passionate about soccer. I'd watched both kids grow up, had attended their birthday parties and school plays. Michael's affair with Patricia wouldn't just destroy his marriage to Alina, it would devastate his children, who would learn that their father was capable of betraying everyone who loved him. Like me, Alina didn't yet know about the devastating revelation coming her way. She was probably at work right now, caring for sick children with the same dedication she'd shown her own family for 2 decades. She'd built her life around the assumption that Michael was trustworthy, that their marriage was solid, that she could depend on the man she'd chosen to raise her children with. But unlike me, Alina didn't yet know about the betrayal that was about to shatter her world. I had information she needed, and more importantly, she had something I was beginning to realize I desperately wanted: the chance to ensure that the people who'd betrayed us both paid a real price for their actions. The idea that would change everything started as a whisper in the back of my mind. Alina Torres was about to lose everything she'd built with Michael. In the inevitable divorce, she'd be entitled to half of their assets, but Michael was clever with money, good at hiding things when he needed to. As my business partner, he understood financial strategies that most people never learned. She'd get something, but probably not enough to truly start over at 48 years old with 2 children approaching college age. Meanwhile, Patricia expected to walk away from our marriage with half of my considerably larger fortune. California was a community property state, which meant she'd be entitled to roughly $1.2 million in cash, investments, and real estate. She'd calculated that her betrayal would cost her a comfortable lifestyle, but not her financial security. She would be wrong about that calculation. I spent the rest of Thursday researching divorce law, asset protection strategies, and legal precedents for transferring wealth. The internet provided a wealth of information about legitimate methods for restructuring finances, and my business background gave me the knowledge to understand complex financial instruments. By evening, I had the framework of a plan that was both elegant and devastating. Patricia and Michael thought they were conducting a secret affair that would eventually lead to discreet divorces and new lives together. What they didn't realize was that they'd chosen the wrong people to betray. Elena Torres and I were about to form an alliance that would teach them the true cost of deception. But first, I needed to gather more information. Michael's betrayal went beyond adultery. As my business partner, he had access to confidential information about our company's finances, our client relationships, and our strategic plans. If he was willing to betray me personally, what else might he be willing to do? I spent Friday morning reviewing our business records, looking for any signs that Michael had been using his position for personal gain. What I found was disturbing but not entirely surprising. Michael had been steering certain lucrative contracts toward companies owned by his college roommate, companies that then subcontracted work back to our firm at inflated prices. The arrangement was technically legal but ethically questionable, and it had been generating additional income for Michael that he hadn't shared with me as his partner. Over 3 years, he'd probably earned an extra $75,000 through these arrangements. More concerning was evidence that Michael had been sharing confidential information about our clients with outside contacts. He'd forwarded proprietary technical specifications to competitors, shared pricing information that gave other firms advantages in bidding processes, and provided strategic insights that belonged exclusively to our company. None of it was criminal, but all of it violated the trust and partnership agreements that formed the foundation of our business relationship. The pattern was clear. Michael Torres was someone who viewed trust as a weakness to be exploited rather than a bond to be honored. He'd betrayed me professionally just as he was betraying me personally, treating our partnership as an opportunity for personal enrichment rather than a mutual commitment to shared success. Friday evening, I called Elena Torres. My voice was steady as I spoke, though my heart hammered against my ribs with the weight of what I was about to set in motion. "Elena, this is Bob Matthews," I said when she answered. "Michael's business partner. I wondered if we could meet for coffee tomorrow morning. There's something important we need to discuss." There was a pause on the other end of the line, probably as Elena processed the unusual nature of my request. We'd known each other for years but had never socialized independently of our spouses. My call was breaking established patterns in a way that would naturally raise questions. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her nurse's instincts probably picking up on something in my tone. "Is Michael okay?" "Michael is fine," I replied, the lie coming easier than I'd expected. "But there are some things you need to know about what's been happening, things that affect both of us." "I can meet you tomorrow morning," Elena said after another pause. "Where did you have in mind?" "The Grind on Maple Street, 10 o'clock. "I'll be there." The conversation that followed would set in motion events that neither Patricia nor Michael could anticipate, predict, or prevent. I spent Friday evening preparing for the most important meeting of my life, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered and rehearsing the words that would begin the destruction of 2 marriages and the construction of perfect revenge. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, March weather that matched my mood as I drove across town to meet Elena Torres. The Grind sat in a strip mall between a used bookstore and a tax preparation service, the kind of unremarkable location where 2 people could have a serious conversation without attracting attention or encountering mutual acquaintances. I arrived early, selecting a corner table with clear sightlines to the entrance. The cafe was half empty, populated by college students working on laptops and a few early morning joggers grabbing coffee before their weekend runs. The familiar sounds of espresso machines and quiet conversation provided comfortable background noise for what promised to be an uncomfortable conversation. My hands were steadier than they'd been in days, the nervous energy of discovery transformed into the focused calm of purpose. Alina would arrive any moment, still innocent of what her husband had been doing, still believing in the marriage she'd thought was secure and loving. In 10 minutes, I would destroy that innocence forever, but I would also give her the tools to rebuild her life on stronger foundations. Alina appeared in the doorway at exactly 10 a.m., punctual as always. She wore jeans and a casual sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 48 years. Even without makeup and dressed for weekend errands, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent decades caring for others. Her slight build and gentle demeanor masked the inner strength that had made her an excellent nurse and devoted mother. She spotted me immediately and approached with a smile, though I could see questions in her dark eyes. She moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to navigating hospital corridors and pediatric wards, someone who'd learned to project calm competence even in crisis situations. "Bob," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right with the business?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my mind a dozen times, but facing Alina's trusting expression made the words harder to say. She deserved better than what I was about to tell her, deserved better than what Michael had done to their marriage. Her wedding ring caught the morning light, a simple gold band that spoke of promises made and vows taken seriously. "Alina," I began carefully, "what I'm about to share will be difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth about what's been happening." Her smile faded as she read something in my expression that prepared her for bad news. She leaned forward slightly, her nurse's instincts perhaps recognizing the signs of someone delivering a difficult diagnosis. Her hands folded on the table, steady and prepared for whatever was coming. "It's about Michael and Patricia," I continued, watching her face for signs of understanding. "They've been having an affair." The words hung in the air between us like a physical weight. Alina's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, disbelief, the beginning of understanding, then a pain so raw it was difficult to watch. She sat back in her chair as if I'd struck her, one hand moving instinctively to cover her heart. "That's not possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Michael wouldn't. We just celebrated our anniversary last month. He bought me roses, took me to that little restaurant I love downtown. He said he was grateful for all the years we'd had together, that he looked forward to growing old with me." Her voice trailed off as memories realigned themselves in her mind, romantic gestures taking on different meanings, explanations for Michael's behavior suddenly seeming inadequate. The anniversary dinner she'd treasured was probably Michael assuaging his guilt about the affair he was already conducting. The roses were consolation prizes, not expressions of love. "I'm sorry, Alina. I know this is devastating, but I have proof." I slid my phone across the table, showing her the text message Michael had sent to Patricia. The message that had been meant for my wife but delivered to the wrong number, a technological accident that had exposed their entire relationship. Alina stared at the screen for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions like someone processing physical trauma. When she finally looked up at me, tears had begun forming in her eyes, but underneath the pain was something else. The beginnings of anger, the first stirrings of a fury that would ultimately fuel her determination to fight back against the people who'd betrayed her trust. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Based on the credit card records, at least 6 months, possibly longer." Alina's hands clenched into fists on the table, her knuckles white with tension. 6 months of lies. 6 months of him coming home to me after being with her. 6 months of me believing everything was fine, that we were happy, that our marriage was strong. I watched her process the betrayal, seeing in her face the same succession of emotions I'd experienced. The shock, the self-doubt, the anger, the sense of everything familiar suddenly becoming foreign and suspect. But Alina was stronger than I'd expected, her years as a pediatric nurse having taught her to function under pressure and make difficult decisions in crisis situations. "Our children," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with new worry. "Sophia and Marcus, they adore their father. This will destroy them." "They'll survive," I said gently. "Children are more resilient than we think, and they'll be better off knowing the truth than living in a house built on lies." Alina nodded slowly, accepting the painful reality that her family was about to be torn apart by Michael's selfish choices. "What do you want to do about it?" she asked, the question surprising me with its directness. I'd expected tears, denial, maybe even blame directed at me for being the messenger. Instead, Alina was already thinking strategically, already moving past the emotional impact toward practical considerations. Her nurse's training was serving her well, helping her compartmentalize the pain so she could focus on necessary actions. "I want them to pay for what they've done," I said simply. "Both of them. Not just the inconvenience of divorce, but real consequences for the choices they've made." Alina's dark eyes hardened with determination. "They think they're so clever, don't they? Planning their secret weekend together, believing we're too trusting or too stupid to figure out what's happening. They're wrong about that." I leaned forward, outlining the plan that had been forming in my mind since Thursday evening. "Patricia expects to walk away from our divorce with half of my assets. That's roughly $1.2 million in cash, investments, and property. Michael expects to keep most of his wealth hidden or protected through financial strategies he's learned from our business partnership. Neither of them expects us to work together." The idea was elegant in its simplicity. Before filing for divorce, I would legally transfer the majority of my assets to Alina as gifts. Completely legal, impossible to reverse, and devastating to Patricia's financial expectations. Meanwhile, Alina would use her knowledge of Michael's habits, passwords, and hiding places to ensure he couldn't conceal assets from their divorce proceedings. We would help each other not just survive our spouse's betrayals, but emerge from them stronger and wealthier than before. More importantly, we would ensure that Patricia and Michael's affair cost them everything they'd hoped to gain from their deception. Alina listened to my proposal with the focused attention she probably brought to medical emergencies. When I finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, considering implications and consequences. I could see her mind working, processing the legal and practical aspects of what I was suggesting. "They made their choice," she said finally, her voice steady and resolved. "They chose to destroy 2 marriages, to lie to people who loved them, to risk everything for their selfish desires. I'm tired of being the only person in my marriage who actually honors the vows we made." "What do we do first?" she asked, and I knew I'd found the ally I needed. "We gather information," I said. "Michael has been preparing for this longer than we realized. He's probably been moving money, hiding assets, setting up accounts we don't know about. We need to find out exactly what we're dealing with before we make our move." Alina's expression grew thoughtful. "Michael keeps a safe in his home office. I've known the combination for years but never paid attention to what was inside. Important papers, bank statements, probably information about accounts he's kept secret. Can you get access to those documents?" "Michael is taking Sophia to visit colleges this weekend. They'll be gone until Sunday evening. I'll have the house to myself for 2 full days." The timing was perfect. While Patricia and Michael were conducting their romantic weekend getaway, Alina would be documenting the financial deception that would ultimately destroy them both. The cheaters would return from their secret rendezvous to find their victims had become their worst enemies. Be careful, I warned. Make copies, not originals. We can't let him know we've discovered his preparations. Elena smiled for the first time since I delivered the devastating news about her husband's affair. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was determined. Don't worry about me, Bob. I've been taking care of people my whole life. Now it's time to take care of myself. The meeting ended with Elena and me shaking hands like business partners, which in a sense we had become. We were partners in ensuring that betrayal came with real consequences, that trust meant something, and that people who destroyed marriages for selfish reasons paid more than they expected to pay. That evening, I watched Patricia pack for her weekend trip with unusual attention to detail. She'd bought new lingerie, expensive pieces I'd never seen before, and she packed them carefully between more conventional clothing. She selected outfits that flattered her figure, shoes that made her legs look longer, jewelry that caught the light. She was preparing for romance with the same care she'd once taken for our own special occasions. Have a wonderful time with Susan, I said as she closed her suitcase, the lie slipping easily from my lips. I will, she replied, kissing my cheek with what seemed like genuine affection. Take care of yourself while I'm gone. Don't work too hard. I watched her car disappear down our street, knowing it was carrying her toward the last weekend of her comfortable life. By the time she returned on Sunday, everything would have changed. The chess game was entering its final phase, and I'd been thinking several moves ahead from the very beginning. Sunday evening brought 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first came from Elena, her voice tight with excitement and anger. Bob, you need to see what I found. Michael has been planning this for much longer than we realized. The second call came an hour later from Patricia, her voice strained and suspicious. Bob, I need to ask you something. Have you been checking our credit card statements more carefully lately? Some of my purchases seem to be missing from the online account. I'd made a mistake, been too thorough in my investigation. Patricia had noticed that I'd been printing transaction records, and her guilty conscience had made her paranoid about discovery. But it was too late for her caution now. The evidence was already gathered, the plan was already in motion, and Elena Torres had information that would destroy both cheaters completely. Just routine financial review, sweetheart, I said calmly. Nothing to worry about. How was your visit with Susan? Fine, Patricia said, but I could hear doubt in her voice. We'll talk when I get home. That conversation would happen sooner than she expected, and it would include information she'd never anticipated facing. Elena Torres and I were about to teach 2 cheaters the true meaning of consequences. Monday morning, Elena and I met again at the grind. This time she carried a thick manila folder, her expression grim with fresh knowledge about her husband's character. She spread documents across our corner table like evidence in a criminal investigation, each paper revealing new depths of Michael's deception. He's been planning this for over a year, she said, her voice controlled but furious. Look at this. The documents told a story of systematic financial preparation for divorce. Bank accounts opened in Michael's name only, investment transfers to offshore holdings, even consultations with divorce attorneys dating back 14 months. Michael Torres had been preparing to leave his wife long before I discovered the affair, long before he'd started his relationship with Patricia. He knew he'd eventually want out of our marriage, Elena continued, so he started moving money beyond my reach. But his careful planning had one fatal flaw. He didn't expect his wife to become allies with the husband of his mistress. The safe had also contained something else, printed emails between Michael and Patricia, documenting their affair in devastating detail. The communications revealed not just their romantic relationship, but the cold calculation behind both betrayals. Patricia had told Michael about my health concerns, my medication, my travel schedule, giving him information to plan their meetings. Michael had shared details about his financial strategies, boasting about how he'd hidden assets from Alina and how Patricia could do the same with my money. Most damaging of all was an email dated just 3 weeks ago, where Patricia and Michael discussed their timeline for leaving their marriages. They planned to wait until after Easter, then file for divorce simultaneously. Patricia expected to receive half of my assets, roughly $1.2 million. Michael believed his hidden accounts would leave Alina with less than $200,000. Combined, they'd have nearly $5 million to start their new life together. They'd calculated their betrayal down to the dollar amount, treated the destruction of 2 families like a business transaction with predictable returns on investment. "There's more," Alina said, pulling out another document. "Michael has been embezzling from your business partnership. Small amounts but consistent. He's been billing personal expenses as business costs, claiming reimbursements for fictional client meetings, even charging his dates with Patricia as business lunches." The evidence kept mounting. Michael hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd been stealing from our business partnership for months. The total amount was relatively small, probably less than $15,000, but it represented a complete breach of trust and partnership. Combined with his affair with my wife, it painted a picture of someone who viewed other people's resources as his personal property. "They made one crucial mistake," Alina said, gathering the documents with efficient movements. "They underestimated the people they were betraying. They thought we'd be too hurt, too shocked, too broken to fight back effectively." "They were wrong about that," I agreed. We spent the next hour planning our counterattack. Alina's divorce attorney was a woman named Jessica Chen, known throughout the city as an aggressive litigator who specialized in cases involving hidden assets and financial deception. Armed with photocopies of Michael's secret financial documents, Alina would file for divorce immediately, before Michael had any opportunity to move additional assets or cover his tracks. Meanwhile, I would begin the process of legally transferring the majority of my wealth to Alina as gifts, using estate planning strategies that were completely legitimate but would devastate Patricia's expectations about our divorce settlement. The transfers would be irrevocable, properly documented, and executed before Patricia even knew divorce proceedings were beginning. By Tuesday afternoon, Michael Torres would be served with divorce papers at our office, in front of colleagues and clients. He'd learned that his wife knew everything, that his financial planning had been useless, and that his affair with Patricia had cost him nearly everything he'd worked to build. But Michael's nightmare would be nothing compared to what awaited Patricia. She would discover that the husband she'd considered predictable and routine had outmaneuvered her completely, that her comfortable assumptions about divorce settlements were based on assets that no longer existed, and that her romantic weekend had cost her financial security she'd taken for granted for 4 decades. The perfect revenge wasn't about hatred or cruelty. It was about ensuring that people faced real consequences for their choices, that betrayal cost more than they were willing to pay, and that the victims of deception emerged stronger than their betrayers. Alina Torres and I shook hands in the parking lot outside the grind, 2 people united by betrayal but determined to emerge victorious. In 48 hours, the cheaters who destroyed our marriages would learn the true price of their deception. Tuesday morning arrived with spring sunshine that seemed to mock the storm about to break over 2 marriages. I dressed carefully for the day ahead, selecting my best suit and the tie Patricia had given me for Christmas. If this was going to be the day everything changed, I wanted to look like a man who'd won rather than a victim who'd been defeated. The law office of Margaret Whitfield occupied the entire second floor of a restored Victorian mansion downtown, her practice specializing in estate planning and asset protection for wealthy clients who valued discretion as much as expertise. Margaret had handled my business legal affairs for 15 years, had drafted my will, and had helped structure the trusts that would eventually benefit my children and grandchildren. She knew my financial situation better than almost anyone, which made her both the perfect attorney for what I was planning and the person most likely to ask uncomfortable questions about my motivations. Margaret greeted me with the same warm professionalism she'd shown for a decade and a half, gesturing toward the leather chairs positioned in front of her mahogany desk. Her office was decorated with antiques and artwork that spoke of old money and established clientele, the kind of environment where wealthy people made decisions about generational wealth transfers. "Bob," she said, settling behind her desk with my file already open, "you mentioned on the phone that you wanted to restructure some of your holdings. What did you have in mind?" I'd spent the weekend preparing for this conversation, rehearsing explanations that would sound reasonable without revealing the true scope of what I was planning. Margaret was too good at her job to accept vague instructions without understanding the underlying motivations. "I've been thinking about gift tax advantages," I began, keeping my voice level and businesslike. "There are some opportunities to transfer assets now that might not be available if tax laws change in the coming years." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. She'd built her reputation on helping clients navigate complex financial strategies, and my opening statement touched on legitimate concerns that many wealthy individuals shared. "What kind of transfers are you considering?" "I'd like to establish a significant gift to Alina Torres, Michael's wife from our business partnership. The amount would be substantial enough to trigger gift tax implications, but I believe the timing makes sense from a planning perspective." Margaret's pen paused over her notepad. "Alina Torres," she repeated carefully. "May I ask what prompted this particular choice?" "It's unusual to make such significant gifts outside the immediate family. Alina has been like family to Patricia and me for years," I said, the explanation prepared and partially truthful. "She's facing some financial challenges with her children approaching college age, and I'd like to help. She's also been incredibly kind to Patricia during some difficult times recently." The explanation was thin, but not entirely false. Alina was facing financial challenges, though she didn't know it yet, and she had been kind to Patricia, though Patricia had repaid that kindness with betrayal. Margaret studied my face with the practiced gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading clients' motivations and hidden agendas. "Bob, I need to ask some direct questions. Are you and Patricia considering divorce?" The question I'd hoped to avoid hung in the air between us. Margaret was too experienced to miss the implications of a substantial gift to someone outside the family, especially when that someone was married to my business partner. Gift transfers immediately before divorce proceedings often raised red flags about asset hiding or manipulation. "No," I said, the lie coming easier than I'd expected. "Patricia and I are fine. This is purely about tax planning and helping a friend who's been important to our family." Margaret made notes in her file, but her expression remained skeptical. "I need you to understand the legal implications of what you're proposing. If you and Patricia were to divorce within the next few years, this transfer could be scrutinized by the court. It might be viewed as an attempt to reduce the marital estate before asset division." "I understand," I replied, "but I'm confident about my marriage, and I want to take advantage of current tax laws while they're favorable." The meeting continued for another hour, with Margaret walking me through the paperwork required to transfer $800,000 in cash and securities to Alina Torres as an irrevocable gift. The amount represented roughly 2/3 of my liquid assets, leaving Patricia with far less than she expected in any future divorce settlement. Margaret prepared the documents with professional thoroughness, but I could see the questions in her eyes. She suspected something was happening that I wasn't sharing, but client confidentiality prevented her from refusing to execute legal instructions that weren't technically fraudulent or criminal. The gift was legitimate, the paperwork proper, the tax implications correctly calculated. "The documents will be ready for execution tomorrow morning," Margaret said as we concluded the meeting. "You'll need to bring Alina Torres in to sign the acceptance paperwork and handle the tax documentation." "She'll be here at 10 a.m., I confirmed. That evening I called Alina with final instructions. "Tomorrow morning, you'll receive a call from Margaret Whitfield's office. She'll need you to come in and sign some paperwork. Don't ask too many questions, just follow her instructions." Alina had spent the weekend processing the reality of Michael's betrayal, and her voice carried new steel when she responded. "How much are we talking about?" "Enough to change your life," I said. "Enough to ensure you're never financially vulnerable again, and enough to guarantee that Michael's affair costs him more than he ever imagined paying." "What about Patricia?" Alina asked. "Patricia will discover tomorrow that her assumptions about our divorce settlement were wildly optimistic. The woman who thought she could calculate the cost of betrayal will learn that some prices can't be predicted." Wednesday morning brought the culmination of everything I'd planned. The documents were signed at Margaret Whitfield's office, with Alina Torres becoming $800,000 wealthier, while my wife's financial future was dramatically altered without her knowledge. Alina handled the paperwork with quiet dignity, asking appropriate questions, and signing her name with the careful precision of someone who understood the magnitude of what was happening. By noon, Michael Torres had been served with divorce papers at our office, in front of colleagues who'd respected him as a successful businessman. Jessica Chen's aggressive legal strategy had caught him completely off guard, and his attempts to deny Alina's accusations were undermined by the documentation she'd copied from his safe. At 2 p.m., Patricia received a call from her attorney, asking urgent questions about unusual financial transactions that had appeared in our accounts. Her second hint of trouble came when she tried to access our joint savings account and found it nearly empty. Her third hint came when she arrived home to find divorce papers waiting on the kitchen counter, along with a complete accounting of where her expected inheritance had gone. The conversation that followed was everything I'd hoped it would be. Patricia's fury, her threats, her demands, her realization that the predictable and routine husband she'd betrayed had proven far more cunning than her calculating lover. She'd lost her marriage, her financial security, and her future with Michael in a single coordinated strike. "What have you done?" she screamed, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "Where is our money?" "Our money," I replied calmly. "You mean the money I earned while you were sleeping with my business partner. That money is exactly where it belongs, with someone who deserves it." Patricia's threats to contest the gift transfers were met with Margaret Whitfield's professional assurance that the documents were unassailable. The gifts had been properly executed, adequately documented, and completed before any divorce proceedings began. Patricia could challenge them in court, but she'd lose and pay additional legal fees for the privilege. Meanwhile, Alina Torres received word that her divorce from Michael had been finalized with unprecedented speed, thanks to his documented financial deception and his attorney's advice to accept Jessica Chen's terms rather than face criminal prosecution for embezzlement. Alina walked away with 85% of their marital assets, plus damages, plus the $800,000 gift I'd given her. Michael, who'd planned to leave his marriage with over $1 million, ended up with less than $100,000 and a reputation destroyed by evidence of his business embezzlement and personal betrayals. The man who'd thought he was clever enough to conduct a secret affair while stealing from his business partner discovered that intelligence without character leads to catastrophic consequences. The final piece of my revenge came 6 months later, when Patricia and Michael's relationship collapsed under the weight of their financial pressures. Without money to fund their romantic lifestyle, without the excitement of forbidden meetings, without the shared sense of getting away with deception, they discovered they had nothing substantial to build a relationship on. Patricia moved into a small apartment across town, her comfortable lifestyle reduced to basic necessities. Michael left the city entirely, unable to find employment after word spread about his business ethics and personal character. Their affair, which had seemed worth destroying 2 marriages for, proved unable to survive the consequences of their choices. Alina Torres, meanwhile, used her newfound financial security to complete a master's degree in nursing administration, eventually becoming director of pediatric services at the Children's Hospital, where she'd worked for 2 decades. Her children thrived despite their parents' divorce, probably benefiting from Alina's newfound confidence and Michael's absence from their daily lives. As for me, I discovered that revenge executed with intelligence and patience was far more satisfying than the anger and hurt that had initially consumed me. I'd ensured that Patricia and Michael paid a real price for their betrayals, that Alina Torres emerged stronger than before, and that justice was served through legal means rather than emotional destruction. The perfect revenge, I learned, isn't about hatred or cruelty. It's about ensuring that actions have consequences, that trust means something, and that people who choose to destroy others for selfish reasons discover that some prices are too steep to afford. Patricia and Michael had calculated the cost of their affair in terms of hurt feelings and inconvenient divorces. They'd never considered that their victims might prove more cunning than their betrayers. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.